So my degree is in molecular and biomedical pharmacology. It sounds like quite a bit. But what I've been tasked to do in my life is actually to design drugs. And so I've come up with chemotherapeutics and diagnostic compounds. And if anyone has ever had the pleasure of trying to push these things into market, you know how difficult it can be. And so as makers, we see these as kind of stepping stones or things that we have to try to overcome. But in actuality, they're perfect. Because we need these restrictions. We need them so that we can ensure patient safety. So when you look at drug design, you have to start with preclinical trials, and then you do phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4 human trials. Now, for preclinical trials, you have to show your compound is made in a GMP FDA facility, the compound structure is intact, you have to do a lot of in vivo, in vitro trials, and in the animals, you have to test metabolite breakdown and overall safety, toxicology, and pathology, right? And so when I go to a lot of conferences, I talk about, startup companies, they're in the pharmaceutical world, and then you hear, medical devices. They're great because you can fast track them. There's not requirements for safety. There's not requirements for efficacy. It's a very easy, quick process. And so life science companies are excited about this. Investors, entrepreneurs are excited about this, that it's a lot easier to go through than actual drug companies and design. Now, if you think about that, is that actually a good thing for patients, right? Who is receiving the device or using that device? So my study, along with HealthWatch, was looking at the MAUDE database and saying, let's look after the fact. Is anybody reporting incidents of this? And where are those reports coming from? And then is there any trend that we can see to maybe improve this overall FDA system? So my first slide is just telling you guys what this actual system is. So it's called MAUDE, which is Manufacturer and User Facility Device Experience. Now, this is intended to safeguard patient safety. This database is the main instrument used by the FDA for post-market surveillance of medical devices. And so what we were concerned with was who's doing the reporting and how is this being tracked? Now, if you look at different types of devices that are medical that can be used. Some are used externally, so outside the body. Some are implanted into the patients. Maybe they're metal. But then some have moving parts and maybe electrical units associated with them. So there's a wide range of devices that can be used, and we get 3 classifications for them. If you're a class 1 for your 510K, you don't really have a lot of restrictions whenever you file it. Along with, you don't have to have pre-market approval indicating safety or efficacy of the actual device. For class 2, these are ones that can be implanted, but they also can be exempt from different regulations dealing with a 510 approval and also pre-market. And then you get class 3, which are required for pre-market approval, which we say is PMA. And so these are ones that have to do testing to ensure safety and efficacy. It's only the class 3 that is required. So devices which have a significant potential for adverse patient safety events are those which are implanted and have electrical parts. And so those are the ones that are usually going to be filed under the class 3 and need to be shown that they have to have pre-market safety. So what we did for looking to who is reporting, we investigated the MAUDE database, and you can see we looked for acquisition dates from 1997 all the way to 2018. So we looked at the entire FDA database. Now, look how many adverse events, 7 million, right? Almost 8 million actually adverse events. So quite a few. Now, in my world of science and dealing with healthcare, it's really interesting. We say the science moves as quickly as the computer software industry moves. So we didn't go through 7.5 million and tally things up. We had to get a computer software analyst to help us and create an own computer software program that then could sort through 7.5 million data files and sets and figure out all of the data that we can then analyze. So from the entire MAUDE database, this is what we found. The 96.6%, so 7,500,000 of the reports originated within manufacturers of the device. And so we believe many of these probably spurred by warranty claims, lawsuits, potentially trying to ward off these lawsuits. However, the database that we found while we were looking through it is very convoluted. It doesn't have a lot of useful clinical information, and it's not required to provide that. Next was patients. They were the next most frequent submitter to the FDA through the MAUDE database. So 33,000, which we found was 5 times more often than physicians, right? You would think physicians would be next, correct? Because they're the one implanting the device. They're the one dealing with the patients, listening to the patients when they come into the office, dealing with the symptoms. But they weren't the ones reporting it to the FDA. The third was nurses, so 18,800. So this was also 2.7 times more often than physicians. And then attorneys, they reported 2.4%. Now, only 0.8% of this was directly to the FDA. The attorneys usually will submit it to the manufacturers, their claim, and then the manufacturers are then required to submit it on to the MAUDE database and the FDA. So when you look at physicians who are directly reporting to the FDA, it's only 0.49%. Okay? And so overall, representing all reports, it's only 0.09. So we think that there could be significant improvements with this. Now, if you look at the integrity of what is being reported or how the database is actually set up, it's not very well structured. So here's an example of some of the things that we saw. When you filed claims under a company like Johnson & Johnson, it could be entered Johnson & Johnson, or Johnson, no spaces between the and, or the and written out, or the J and J, or the J with spaces. And so it becomes extremely hard to track it. Anyone that's even done like a small little Excel sheet, right? Just trying to sort all of that, you would get different lines for every single one of these, even though it's all coming from the exact same company. So free field entry for patient history and symptoms usually lacks specifics, quantitative data, and laboratory results. So meaning they don't have to put a lot of input dealing with what are the symptoms, what are the reports to make sure that this is actually maybe a toxicology report or a path report indicating that this is a problem with the medical device. And then another issue that we saw were duplicate records were really common for whatever reason, we don't know. But so we really had to go through and analyze and make sure we weren't tallying up the same report over and over and over again. So clinical data is entered in an unstructured field and is often has little specifics or clinically important data. Laboratory test results and other quantitative measures are usually absent. So here's one example. So this is from another paper that HealthWatch did. So there was 14,714 records that reported cobalt toxicity. So cobalt is a metal that is used on implantable devices, so things like hips, right? But only 4% of the 17,000 actually listed laboratory results indicating the cobalt levels in the patient. So a question is, how can we prove that you have cobalt toxicity in these patients when you don't have any data indicating that there is toxicity? So mandatory reporting, right? You should feel that there should be some sort of mandatory reporting going on. Well, there is. So manufacturers and healthcare facilities must report all adverse events which cause severe harm to the FDA. However, the definition of severe harm is not defined. And actually, that allows the manufacturer and the facility to declare what is severe harm, which gives a lot of loose leeway. And then healthcare professionals are not required to report harm or fatalities to the FDA. And this is something that we can severely improve upon. And there is a MedWatch webpage, which is actually pretty easy to go through, that healthcare professionals can use. So this is something moving forward that we would like the FDA to take note of and maybe educate physicians and get them to really report any type of device pathology or toxicity that they see. So facilities, you should ask, right? They're mandatory in their reporting, but facilities only made up 1.3% of the reports, right? So this question questions the compliance and effectiveness of the regulatory reporting requirement, right? Okay, so should providers reporting be mandatory? Well, there's a lot of logistics with this, right? You have to make sure that they are reporting. You have to have policies around this. You have to be able to regulate it. You have to be able to monitor it, okay? So surveillance of reporting. Now, another issue is many implantable devices have problems which present later in the patient, so many, many years post-implant. And then how do you have to track the implant? What type of implant was put in? That becomes very, very difficult. So for a report to be useful, the type of medical device must be known. That's just key. However, with the exception of the surgeon, the treating physician, the primary care doctor, not many people know and can track what device was actually implanted many, many years post. Now, for reporting, each device has a unique device identifier. This is what we call a UDI number. And this needs to be present on the device if possible and readily accessible in the medical record. And so a key for that is giving it into the record. And I would also like to see the patient receive this information as well. But otherwise, the MAUDE record will not be able to relate the device or the product code, which is actually a huge problem when you look at post-market surveillance and then actually reporting the issue to the MAUDE database. So, labels required on devices and packages. Class 1 UD labels are not enforced. Okay? And these are ones that don't have regulations dealing with that 510(k) process. Class 2 and 3 devices, a device that is required to be labeled with a UDI must bear a UDI as a permanent marking on the device itself if the device is intended to be used more than once and intended to be reprocessed and reused. In addition, single-use implantable devices are not included in this exception. Now, if I show you an example of a label, it would look like this. Okay, there's a lot on it, but you could put this label, a copy of it, in the medical records, and you could give a copy of it into the hands of the actual patient that received the device. Now, implantable devices. However, the requirements appear to exclude placing the UDI on implantable devices because of these exceptions. 1, any type of direct marking would interfere with the safety or effectiveness of the device. So that's saying they can't put that UDI on the device when it's put into the patient because it might cause complications with the device's ability to do what it needs to do in the patient. Or 2, the device cannot be directly marked because it is not technologically feasible. So UDI labels are required on all implantable device packages, not on the device itself. And then implantable devices are a problem since they are used for years and the UDI is not placed on these devices, so tracking them is extremely difficult. Thus, even when the device is removed, the serial number, model, and make may still be in doubt. Now, if we think about this, and I like to think about it like this, any household device, even a toaster, the consumer is given written information on the operation and the risks and the device upon purchase. And there's usually a serial number on most of our pieces of equipment in our household. The same needs to be true for medical devices. And the patient should be given written material and the make and model and the number of the implantable device, so that if there are any problems that occur many, many years later, if that device is removed, they can then report it to the FDA. Now, informing patients. There needs to be easy access to the UDI in patients' medical records. This will allow both the primary care provider and patient to accurately identify the type of device which has been implanted and may be associated with the patient, right? That sounds like a give me. However, if many of you have ever tried to get your medical records, sometimes this can be extremely difficult. So, however, many medical records may not be easily accessible by the provider who is not in the same healthcare system. And so, if we could then put this into the medical record database, that would be a better option. So, in conclusion, the FDA needs objective, unbiased, complete data relating to any adverse device-related incident. Physicians and healthcare providers bring a unique perspective and, I think, provide vital information on the post-market surveillance, so the symptoms of the patient, what is going on, what are the toxicity levels. However, unfortunately, results from healthcare providers, especially physicians, are rarely submitted. The current reporting process is unstructured and time-consuming, and the overall database itself is disorganized. And building reporting functions into electronic medical records, including easy access to device, UDI number, would really help improve the reporting. And then lastly, in addition is education, right? I think that's key, not just for the patients, but for the healthcare workers and the facilities in general, why they need to keep track of a UDI number, why they need to keep track of what is the device that is placed into the patients, how can they efficiently do this, and then what is the overall FDA regulations on submitting any type of post-market issue needs to be common practice in the healthcare facility. Okay, and with that, I will take any questions.